Hi everyone. This is hopefully a brief discussion regarding the learning style inventory that you completed last week, and also the one regarding kinesthetic and auditory learning that you did this week. I will bring the results and compile all the results and bring them to class, but I wanted to give you some context around this and kind of give you the so what, right? So learning style inventory, it's important to know where you are, or certainly where we all are individually, and think about it. Teachers tend to teach based on the style that works for them, the style that they feel comfortable with. But that might not always be the style that works for the student or the patient or the client that you're working with. So understanding the variety and where you are on that continuum and how you might be able to adapt your learning to meet your students. Your teaching to meet your students and your patients is important and will be helpful to you. So you've already completed the learning style inventory, and I'm just going to again just give you some context around this. This was a learning style or a model of learning that was developed by Kolb many years ago, and there are a few iterations that you will see, but it looks at different modes of learning based on concrete experience, the feeling, reflective observation, watching, abstract conceptualization, which involves more thinking, and the active experimentation that involves more doing. So again, when you filled out this form, you came up with 4 separate points on each of those domain factors. Are you stronger feeling, watching, thinking, or doing, and then connected to create some kind of a shape. And hopefully you have some strengths in each of the domains to make you kind of a well-rounded learner in lots of different areas. We hope that you develop, or your model looks like a kite, and if not, what areas can you improve upon or kind of focus on to help you be stronger in all of the areas that will make you, again, a more well-rounded learner. So Kolb talks about the stages of learning, and you again scored individual scores that provided you with a measure of the relative emphasis that you give to each of those 4 domains of learning: the concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation. So the concrete experience learner, this orientation focuses on being involved in experiences and dealing with immediate human situations in a personal way. It emphasizes feeling more than thinking. There's a concern with the uniqueness and the complexity of the present reality over theories. The person tends to be more intuitive and use an artistic approach over a systematic and scientific method to solve problems. So the strengths are, in this area, you rely more on feelings, rely on the ability to be open-minded and adaptable to change, and learning from feeling and being sensitive to others. Reflective observation is that orientation that focuses on understanding the meanings and situations by carefully observing and watching and describing what you see. It emphasizes the reflection and understanding over actions and over practical applications. And there's a concern with what is true or how things happen over what will work. So the reflective observer understands different points of view because they observe. They rely on patience and objectivity and careful judgment, and rely on your own thoughts and feelings when you're forming opinions. So you tend to watch closely and listen, and you watch for the meaning of things when you're taking it all in and learning. Abstract conceptualization. This orientation focuses on using logic, ideas, concepts. It emphasizes thinking rather than feeling, and there's a concern with building general theories rather than intuitively understanding unique or specific areas. This mode of learning tends to be more scientific than artistic when you're approaching problems. So you use logic and ideas, and you rely on systematic planning and learning by thinking, and then you act on your intellectual understanding. active experimentation. This method or this mode of learning focuses on actively influencing people and changing situations. It emphasizes practical applications as distinct from reflectively understanding. There's a pragmatic concern with what works rather than what is the absolute truth, and there's an emphasis on doing versus observing. So again, this focuses on the experimenting with influencing or changing situations. It tends to be a very practical or pragmatic approach to learning, and sees the value in getting things done and the results of your influence and ingenuity. So you learn by doing. There's ability to get things done that can involve some risk taking and influencing through your actions. So when you filled out your grid here, when you filled out the initial dots, a positive score on that AC line, that y-axis there, a positive score, so a score that tends to be lower on that y-axis, means that you tend to be more abstract, and a negative score means that you tend to be more concrete. If you're looking at the y-axis, that AERO axis, a negative score indicates that you tend to be more reflective, so more to the right you tend to be more reflective, and positive scores to the left you tend to be more active. So within those specific modes of learning, this model tells you or tends to define whether you have a more dominant learning style. And those dominant learning styles are accommodators, divergers, convergers, and assimilators. And I think it's important to note that these dominant learning styles describe how you learn. They don't describe how well you learn. There's not one style that's intrinsically better or worse than another. It's just to know kind of where you fit and kind of what that means for how you learn, and for how you need to teach others, because recognize how others will learn. So again, you filled this out, and within the different modes of learning, the 4 dominant learning styles are accommodator, diverger, assimilator, and converger. And you filled out what your style tends to be. The converger. Actually, let's go back one. If we start at the bottom left here, the converger, which is a combination of the abstract conceptualizer and active experimenter, that bottom left corner, convergers are best at finding practical uses for ideas and theories, and they have an ability to solve problems and make decisions based on finding solutions. You would rather deal with technical tasks and problems than social or interpersonal skills. So in this case, convergers have skills that tend to be very relevant for specialist and technical careers, because they're definitely that ability to solve problems, and they kind of want one answer to figure out and to work with. Opposite of the converger is the diverger, and they're definitely opposite learning styles here from the converger and the diverger. So the divergent learning style has again, opposite strengths of convergent. It emphasizes the concrete experience and reflective observation. The greatest strength here lies in imaginative ability and the awareness of meanings and values. There's a primary adaptive ability to view concrete situations from many perspectives, and then to organize these relationships into meaningful fashion. There's an emphasis on adaptation by observation rather than action. It's divergent because it works best in situations that call for the generation of alternative ideas, and implications. And divergers are very good at brainstorming idea sessions and gathering lots of information before making a decision. Its style suggests a preference for social emotional experiences over tasks. And these folks tend to kind of lean towards careers in the arts and entertainment and service industries. Assimilators, the dominant learning abilities in assimilators and the strengths of this orientation lie in inductive reasoning and the ability to create their theoretical models. It's assimilating disparate observations into integrated explanations. It's similar in the convergence that the orientations focus less on the emotional interactions and more on ideas and abstract concepts. Ideas are valued for being logically sound and precise more than their practical values. So it's more important for assimilators to have theory that's logically sound and precise and less focused on abstract ideas and concepts. So these folks tend to be needed or kind of lean towards information and science careers. And then accommodators. Accommodators have learning styles that are opposite in strengths from the assimilators. The greatest strength of the accommodators is to do things, carry out plans and tasks, and get involved in new experiences. The adaptive emphasis of this orientation is on opportunity seeking, risk taking action. This style is called accommodative because it's best suited to situations where you must adapt yourself to changing immediate circumstances. Situations where theory or plans don't fit facts, so you need to be accommodative with your style. And these folks tend to be good for area jobs in marketing and sales because they can be very adaptive and accommodating with their activities. So kind of think about where you fit here. How did the strengths, did you recognize some of that discussion regarding the strengths and how you scored? So see, does this make sense to you? The accommodator that wants to get things done has strength in leadership and risk-taking, where the diverger has strength in imaginative ability, in understanding people, recognizing problems, and brainstorming. The assimilator has strength in planning, creating models, defining problems, developing theories. And the converger likes to problem solve, wants to be the decision maker, deductive reasoning, and defining problems. So within that, there's strengths. There are, there are also recommendations here to develop your skills if this is not your strength, right? So if your strength is an accommodator, you're probably weaker and going to be opposite of an assimilator. So if you need to develop your assimilative learning skills, you can practice organizing information, building conceptual models, testing theories. So I want you to kind of look through this chart to identify the strengths and weaknesses, and that can help you with improving some of the areas in the learning styles that you may not be as comfortable with. So then this grid just explains some of the things we said before about the fields that certain learning styles tend to lean towards. So accommodators tend to lean towards fields in management and public administration. Divergers more lean towards careers in arts and entertainment. The assimilators fields, the stronger fields, tend to be education, ministry, sociology, law, and the convergers tend to lean towards those science careers, mining, forestry, farming. Obviously, this is old, but also when you think about jobs, you think about engineering, chemical engineers, production supervisors, those very problem-solving concrete type positions. So this model here just kind of puts the learning style that we just talked about that's in the center of this model and compares it with the problem-solving skills that that you may see. So when you look at problem solving, problem solving is choosing a model or a goal or a model that you see, comparing it to reality and identifying those differences. And then you select a problem to work towards, consider alternative solutions, evaluate the consequences of the solution, select a solution, execute, see if it was effective, and it tends to be a cycle. Learning the model, inside that experiential model can be also viewed. The learning model can also be viewed as a continuing, recurring process where your concrete experiences are followed by reflective observations that lead to the formulation of abstract concepts that lead to active experimentation to test the hypotheses that you're developing. And so this ongoing process, people may enter at different points, but hopefully you can see where you fit in that process and fit into those, how you can help develop those problem-solving skills. So the other learning style model that I had you look at, the other a way of thinking is the VAC model, which is the perceptual instructional preference model that categorizes learning by sensory preferences. So you've probably heard this before, and people say I'm a visual learner, an auditory learner, or a kinesthetic learner, and this is just a different way to describe learning. So visual learners, and again, hopefully you did this assessment and you figured out where you scored. So visual learners tend to learn by seeing and looking. So these folks tend to take detailed notes, sit in the front of the class so you can see what's going on. Often will close their eyes and visualize or remember something. They find that they want to watch and see what they're learning, so they benefit from illustrations and from presentation that use color that you can really focus in on. Attracted to written or spoken language that's rich in imagery, so people that really describe things that you can see and visualize. And they prefer stimuli to be isolated from auditory or kinesthetic distraction. So visual learners, if you are a visual learner, it may help by drawing pictures in the margins, using text, using highlighters, looking at graphs, charts, rewriting your notes, and using visual information to remember. Auditory learners tend to learn by hearing and listening. So these folks can sit really anywhere in the classroom because they need to be able to hear, but don't necessarily pay attention to what's happening or visualizing what's happening in the front of the room. They may hum or talk to themselves, acquire knowledge by reading aloud. They'll remember verbalization or verbalizing lessons, and they remember these lessons by verbalizing to themselves. So they prefer to listen and sometimes have difficulty with reading maps or diagrams. So if you are an auditory learner, or think about if you're teaching a person who is an auditory learner, it may help them to read out loud, to create jingles or mnemonics to help remember, to discuss ideas and concepts with others, to recite the information to help remember it. And kinesthetic learners, these are the folks that learn by touching and doing, or learn best by touching and doing. So these folks need to be active and take frequent breaks. They tend to speak with their hand and gestures. They remember what's done, but often have difficulty recalling what was said or seen. So they find reasons to tinker or move around and rely on what they can directly experience. So they communicate by touching, and they appreciate that physically expressed encouragement. And sometimes are uncomfortable in classrooms because that sitting and listening lacks the opportunity for a hands-on experience. So these are the folks that learn best in lab by just getting in and doing it. So kinesthetic learners hopefully you can create the activities where studying is more physical, where they can stand or pace, make models, write notes, or do problems on a whiteboard. And use flashcards sometimes can help because it's very physical, and you use those flashcards in turn and are very active with them. So understanding your learning style is important because it does often affect your career choices. It will affect the way you manage people. If you learn one way and you're a learner and you're teaching one way, you're comfortable with one way, but your learner is stronger in another way, is recognizing that and how can you individualize the programs. It may affect how you work as part of a team if you have very different learning styles on your team. But it also can help improve your problem-solving skills by knowing where your strengths are and how to use them appropriately. So some teaching philosophies that you can think about and kind of add to the discussion and context regarding how to learn or how people learn. Usually you think about starting with simple and then moving to complex. So, starting with memorizing and then comparing and contrasting. And we'll talk more about Bloom's taxonomy in another lecture when we talk about how to some of the best practices for creating teaching projects. The whole is one way to teach, where maybe you teach the entire process and overview what should happen as a whole, and then break the activity down into parts, where then you practice and teach specific parts and then bring it back to the whole and the whole activity again. Sometimes that helps people understand better. I need to see the whole picture, and let's break it down and practice parts and then bring it back to practice the entire end product. And there are other strategies that you need to think about in terms of, is lecture better, guided discussion, how to use technology, labs and simulations that can be more kinesthetic, how to test. So is it paper versus practical? What works best within your styles and what you need your person to be able to do. So we did this already. You talked about who was your favorite teacher and why, and least favorite teacher and why. And I think the important thing here that we talked about in class was the why. So think about what worked and what didn't work, especially when you're now teaching others. The same thing with material. What was the hardest material and what was the easiest material, and why? So when you're teaching material going forward, what makes more dense and complicated material easier to understand, and what may make other material easier to understand when you're teaching. And the last part of this, I want you to, so jot down a few notes here when you're done, and we'll talk about them in class, but think about just kind of some other context regarding teaching and learning, and it bothers me when the teacher does what? And what drives you crazy? What impairs your learning or your attention or your ability to engage in the material? And it bothers me when students do what? So your peers or others in the classroom, when does it bother you that might impair, again, your teaching and learning, and what environment might be less conducive than others?